I've got two men who understand this very well. And look, full disclosure, NewsNation is built for independence, okay? I'm not nonpartisan. I'm anti-partisan. I believe the two-party system is killing us. I'm not saying they're the same. It doesn't matter, because that binary battle has wound up just being one fringe against the other, and the country is getting drawn down in tone as well as in substance, okay? Now, to two better minds and their take. My friend and colleague Stephen A. Smith is here, and Sean Spicer, who was Trump's press secretary, of course, you remember, acting White House comms director also in Trump's first term. Now, you will notice Big Bill O'Reilly is not with us. He is sick, health first. So we wish Bill well. He'll be back soon. Good to have you both. Sean, thank you for stepping up and stepping in. Appreciate you for being here. Stephen A., I'll go to you. You heard what I was saying. When you try to have perspective on this first year, what matters to you?
Oh, what matters to me, obviously, is the health of the American people and America as a society. And when we think about what we're going through right now, you're hearing numbers rather. Okay, we're doing well with the economy. A lot of people don't feel that way. When you hear about the rich getting richer, but the poor getting poorer, which is obviously a very salient point that you brought up, that's not something that's going to appease or please a lot of the American people. Certainly, the fact that the economy was going to crater was a bit overblown. I think we have to acknowledge that in all fairness. But in the same breath, if you have the very affluent in our society getting more and more comfortable with each passing day, while those who are struggling to make ends meet are suffering more and more each day, well, that's where the divide really kicks in. And all of a sudden, one party is telling you they're better suited and they care more about your interest than the other party. And then obviously, when you couple that with the fact that we've seen what we've seen in the streets involving ICE, you know what? We know that, let me be very, very clear, because I've never met Sean before. Sean, it's a pleasure to meet you. Let me be very, very clear. I didn't blame Trump one bit for closing the border because Biden opened it. I've said that to you 1,000 times, Chris. You know that. But in the same breath, the how matters, how you go about doing things. And it's especially relevant when it comes to this particular president, because if you remember, a lot of people felt like if it were not for COVID, he was cruising to re-election in 2020. But then COVID set in, and obviously a lot of things happened with the racial riots that were taking place throughout the United States of America and the chaos that was in the streets. And you had an abundance of people having the mindset, we don't need this. This is not what we signed up for. This is not what we wanted. Well, fast forward almost 6 years later, and now we're seeing some of these things transpiring again because of what's transpiring in sanctuary cities, no doubt, between ICE and a lot of American citizens who are coming to the defense of those who may have arrived in the country illegally. So that level of chaos, you don't know what kind of ripple effect, what kind of detrimental effect that it's going to have on elected officials, particularly Trump and obviously other members of the GOP. But with the people that I've spoken to, since I now have my show on POTUS, and I've spoken to a lot of these people, I can tell you there are people on the right who are a bit concerned that the appearance of things, not just the reality, but the actual appearance may be very, very detrimental to them if they don't get things in order. And so that's the way I'm looking at it right now. It's a bit chaotic. It's certainly not as pristine as Trump tries to make it out to be. And it's not as awful as some other people try to make it out to be. But in the end, if the affluent are still getting their wallets padded, while others are struggling, that is not a good thing for America. It absolutely is not.
Sean, the idea of my assessment, is it too dire? Am I missing the green shoots? Am I missing the cause for optimism?
To some degree, but I also think that you're right in the sense that America is divided. So I am a staunch supporter of President Trump, and I think what he's done is fantastic. I understand that people on the left who didn't vote for him probably hate everything that's happening. That's the world that we live in now. But here's what I would argue. Go back, and we've all been around this game for a while. Politicians, generally speaking, get elected and then make a ton of excuses. Here's why I can't get this done. Here are the challenges that I face. Here's what Congress is doing or not doing. President Trump, whether you love him or hate him, go back and look at what he said he would do to the American people. Close the border. He was going to institute tariffs and create a more level playing field. He was going to bring ICE into the communities. He was going to pass tax cuts. He was going to go through the federal budget. He's done it. Now, people may not like it, but he is a politician that actually kept his word and got accomplishments done on all of those things. So for someone like me that actually has long argued a lot of the things that President Trump campaigned on, to see a politician come into office, actually keep their word and get things done, I'm ecstatic. I understand why the other side may not like it, but at the end of the day, he's moving the country forward. I think the economy's going to be stronger. We're safer as a country. And with all due respect, I mean, think about what he's doing on tariffs. It's not like he's fighting for the rich there. He's fighting for the American worker who's been screwed by country after country, taking advantage of U.S. Our markets. We've had an unlevel playing field, and politician after politician on both sides of the aisle have said that's just the way it has to be. On the DOGE front, for too long, the American taxpayer has been told that's just Washington. We waste your tax dollars. Sorry about that. They went in. It may have been a bit chaotic. It may not have always looked pretty, but at the end of the day, I'm tired of sending more and more money to Washington, like so many people who are working 2, 3 jobs just to get by, only to be told, hey, sorry, I know we're wasting it, but send us more. So I give President Trump a lot of credit for going in and doing what he's done the last year.
Sean, let me ask you something, and I'll give it to Stephen.
Well,
one, the DOGE payoff
Sure.
was nowhere near what they said it was. We keep readjusting the numbers. They keep going down. I think it was a sensational failure, because if you can't find waste, fraud, and abuse in Washington, D.C., especially with all your algorithms, I don't know what Elon achieved except getting his software and his Palantir pals well-positioned to surveil you and me and our families. But how do you explain, Sean, why so many people who voted for the president, because you have over a majority of this country, don't like the priorities, don't like the tariffs, think they're crushing small businesses, and don't like the ICE raids, not enforcing immigration, not closing the border, but how he's doing it? How do you explain those numbers if it's just about people who didn't vote for him?
Well, first of all, again, go back to the 3 categories that we live in right now. So you've got people on the left that never voted for him, people on the right that did, and then a chunk of folks in the middle. When you look at the people on the left, they're still not with him. No surprise there. He's still maintained an extremely high support of people on the right that voted for him, somewhere in the 90%. Okay, and then in the middle, look, here's what I get this. NewsNation, when you talk about like Somali fraud and what was going on in Minnesota, NewsNation was the only major network that actually went there to look at what Nick Shirley had uncovered. The only network that did that. For the rest of America, they didn't even know what was going on there. And when they turned on their television, and this is where I'll give Stephen some credit on this, I agree. When you turn on the most television networks that aren't NewsNation right now, all you see is chaos and the idea that ICE is out there targeting innocent Americans, waving signs on the street corner with their constitutional rights under attack. There are people in this country illegally. They broke the law. The president campaigned on removing them. They said that when they would roll up criminals, if other people who were in the country illegally got rolled up with them, they'd get rid of them too, as they should. Now, I get it. I've said this over and over again. If I looked at the NBC or Politico or the New York Times, I'd think this world was in chaos too. That's what the challenges that we face on the right in getting people to tell the truth as far as what's going on.
Stephen A.
Well, I can appreciate the fact that you want people to tell the truth. I mean, but a lot of people want that from the president himself as well. And I think it's fair to say that. The reality, Sean, is this. You bring up a valid point when you talk about how if you voted for him, if you're a Republican and what have you, you really, really have no problem with them. You have a lot of people on the other side that obviously are not as affluent. They're working hard to make ends meet. When you look at the federal employees that were relieved of their duties, when you look and you have concerns about the average person living paycheck to paycheck, and you see the chaos, the lack of stability that's transpiring. Maybe it's because of the tariff wars. Maybe it's because of things that preceded Trump's arrival. Nevertheless, he was the man that promised to fix it. He didn't promise to serve affluent Americans. He promised to serve all Americans. And you have a lot of people that are not affluent that are looking at him and saying, what's up with your word? Didn't you say you were going to do that? When you talk about America first, we've seen you in the Middle East. We've seen you in Israel. We've seen you addressing stuff with Iran. A lot of people can't have a problem with it when you consider the state of affairs and the fact that he took those positions. But you do have people even within his own GOP party that have said, okay, what about us? What about the promises that you've made to the average common American folk? They still want to see that reach fruition. When you talk about the tariffs and ultimately stuff is going to come in, I've said this on many occasions to your friends on the right. I understand the pledges. I understand that the pledges came in the form of trillions of dollars. Well, that's a pledge. That ain't necessarily reality until that money arrives. And it's to the benefit of the American people as opposed to the affluent few. And I think that when you're looking at it from that standpoint, you ultimately have to come back. And I usually use this analogy, Chris and Sean, when we're talking about AI and the advent of AI and how it's here to stay and it's not going anywhere. And millions of people are going to end up losing their jobs. Obviously, the process of evolution kicks in, and you know that eventually, you're going to have to adapt to the change in time. The flip side to it, however, is that if it leads to millions upon millions of people losing their jobs and people are not making money, what's going to ultimately lead to the disintegration of this country? If people are unemployed, that's what's going to do it. That's when you're going to have chaos in the streets. When people are worried about their own livelihood, their own ability to pay their bills. You talk about the price of car, you talk about the price of food, you talk about the price of health care. Chris has talked about all of these things. Are you really doing things to address that? I know he says he is, and I know in the eyes of a lot of folks on the right, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And you do have a point, because a lot of things he campaigned on, he's definitely doing it. I'm not here to say that he lied about what he said he was going to do. The question now remains, how effective is it for all of America, as opposed to just the people that are your friends, the people that are your contemporaries, and the affluent amongst us, as opposed to the average American citizen? That's what everybody on both sides of the aisle is asking.
Sean, give me a quick button.
Stephen,
we'll go to break, and then we'll come back. But go ahead.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I mean, first of all, I'm not really sure where you guys are living, because I get into an Uber, I talk to people at retail outlets. How's it going for you? Yes, people are still struggling, and we're on the path, we're on an upward swing, so everybody could do better. But I'll tell you what, in terms of the midterm, the investment that the president's made, not just in terms of foreign direct investment that Stephen acknowledged, but in terms of the big, beautiful bill and the tax cuts and some of the reforms that are in there, the regulatory reforms. Talk to me in Q2, Q3 next year. I think the economy is going to be firing on all cylinders. And frankly, here's the deal. It really doesn't matter whether you agree with me or not. The bottom line is the Republican majority is at stake. And if the economy's doing well, they'll be reelected and the president will be rewarded. If Stephen and you are right, we're going to get crushed in the midterms. But I happen to think that the investment that the Republicans and this president have made in the economy and in direct investment that will be spread throughout the country is going to pay off big time.
Sure.
We got to go to break, fellas.
Chris, go to commercial with this.
Yes.
Sean, I just go to commercial thinking about this. If it was the other side in office and they asked you to wait till Q2 or Q3 and then come back and talk to us, how would you feel?
Listen,
think about that.
I'm not asking you to wait. I'm not asking you to wait. I'm just telling you a political reality, Stephen. I'm not asking you to wait.
I get it. But listen, here's one thing I know. Sean Spicer knows the record, and he is a good advocate. But I know one who's a lot better. Nobody argues the case for President Trump the way he does. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.